That's correct, especially with the feedback I've been getting. I was curious how the book would actually do, because I had a number of ideas of things I wanted to write. With this particular idea, I was hoping for a 3 or 4 novel series. And what I'm hoping to do now that I'm retired from the practice of law and no longer doing this part-time and these things, is to be able to dedicate basically full-time to this. I hope to have the second novel out next fall and the third novel out the fall after that. So this will be the first in a series. And there are a number of cliffhangers at the end of this. You'll want to read the second book. I've been getting a lot of feedback from people saying, I hope you're writing a second book to this. And I'm not going to be happy with you.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter of somebody who's going to take us to new heights and then kind of push us out the door, going to float gently down in our podcast down to land with you. I'm excited to have Bart here on the podcast, and amazing author who's got some great stories to tell and a great history of a wealth and a depth to draw from as an author, which is amazing. And he's joining me somewhere that I've never been that I'd like to go someday. Bart, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Tell everybody, Bart, where you are today in this big world of ours.
Okay. I'm an American, and my wife and I just moved to the highlands in western Panama by Costa Rica in a little village called Boquete. Mm-hmm. And right now it's sunny outside and in the 70s.
Sounds terrible for a guy in Canada listening to you talk. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, we recently moved from Colorado, and I still have all the what we call weather.com warnings there, and they've been getting snow for the past month. Do not miss that.
Yeah, you're fine.
I'm fine.
Yeah, you don't need a snow shovel where you are. I like that. Why did you guys decide on that place to live? Like, what was the draw?
Basically, we had planned on retiring in about 2 years and basically roaming Italy. I'm a dual Italian American citizen, and we were planning on heading over there. My wife would get permesso sargento, which is essentially their version of a green card, and we just travel Europe for a while. Due to some employment changes, that sort of went out the window for at least a couple of years. And we were looking for some place relatively inexpensive to live. I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but the States are getting expensive because of the inflation. So we decided to live in some place that was nice and moderate, and it cost 60% of what it did in Colorado to live here.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's amazing. I'm excited for you guys, and it's kind of nice to see somebody. I would like somebody's next chapter. It's kind of the name of my podcast, but I like seeing somebody's next chapter and what they're going to do next. I'm always curious on that side. I'm kind of in my mid-50s, and I'm always thinking about what's my next thing? What's my next gig? So I'm kind of living vicariously through you. I think that's an amazing thing to get up, go to another location, and just set up your home. Like, the logistics of that, in your background, you've done many of those things. But for me, as somebody who hasn't done that, it seems overwhelming a little bit.
It can be. A lot of expats, they come down here and they are gone in another year because people speak 4 languages. It's a different culture. It's not home. So they come here. I don't know what they were expecting to begin with. We want to actually meld into the culture. The Panamanians are amazing people. Very friendly. I haven't run into anybody down here that wasn't willing to help us. So it's been fun.
Excellent. We talked when we had our little chat prior to meeting today to record. You've had an amazing history in your service for your country. Some of the places you've been, and we kind of alluded to it in the intro there, but you've done some pretty amazing things. Can you give us a little overview of your service in the military? I want to honor you in what you've done for your country.
Sure. I am a U.S. Army paratrooper. I joined up the first time in the early 80s. We had a recession going on down here, if you recall, way back when let's see, what was it? 82. when I joined up. God, I'm getting old. Uh, but anyways, back then, the Army was advertising, be all you could be. And I needed some college money, and I couldn't find a job during the recession. So I joined the military for a few years and discovered I really liked it, but I wanted to finish up college. So I got out for a couple of years, finished up college in the late 80s, met my wonderful wife down in Florida, and I was thoroughly bored as a civilian at the time. I snuck down, we were living in South Florida at the time, and I snuck down to the Army ROTC base in University of Miami and gave them my what was called a personnel file at the time and said, hey, can I get back in? And they said, sure, you got a wonderful record. So then I go home to my wife and say, hey, honey, how would you like to travel? And the second tour, basically, we went to Germany. And I was an infantry lieutenant at the time. So they gave me my platoon. And all of a sudden, 3 months later, I'm in eating Christmas dinner, of all things, with an Arab Santa Claus in the middle of the Saudi desert.
What?
It was
Wow.
surreal. It was like something out of a Full Metal Jacket or something, if you've ever seen that movie. It was just surreal. But that's where the idea for the basic idea for the book came about. I was in my late 20s at the time, and we did the Persian Gulf War. And literally, we're sitting out in the middle of the desert. We've just done 2 days worth of combat with the Iraqi Republican Guard. And I'm seeing their wrecked vehicles all over the place, and all the Kuwaiti oil fields were burning. And literally, the black smoke was blotting out the sun at midday. It looked like hell on earth. And the thought I had at the time is, what if this actually happened back home in the States? And that was the basis for the idea for the book.
Wow. Okay. But yeah, because that's one thing. You're in someone else's country, their culture, their resources, their climate, everything, and you're fighting a war away from home. But yeah, the idea of fighting a war on your home turf, we're in a defensive mode then a kind of
that all
attacking
depends,
mode, right?
but
Okay.
that's where it would be, because I've always been a military history buff and a history in general buff. And I wasn't writing at the time. Basically, I finished up my hitch in the military and became a lawyer for the next 25 years. And I always wrote nonfiction and that sort of thing. I never wrote fiction before. I actually wrote my unit's military history, the 7th Regiment, while I was over in Germany, because we were basically just demobilizing everything after the Persian Gulf War. It was the end of the Cold War, and basically the U.S. was coming home. Then I started getting interested in writing something else, like fiction, where you can create your own world. And basically, of course, the first thing I thought of in fiction is what I enjoy reading, which is alternative history. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, alternative history is essentially historical fiction, but you do a twist somewhere in the history to create another world. And in the case of my novel, Wolves at the Gate, what I wanted to do was set up a world where those of us in America who are used to sending our troops overseas and our families are safe at home wondering what's going on with us, what happens if it was like World War II or World War I in Europe, where they were fighting in their own neighborhoods and their families were refugees and that sort of thing? How would America react to something like that? Because we're so used to going to other people's country and doing our thing and coming home. So what if the U.S. troops had their families in the firing line in our towns, and it was the Germans and the Japanese in this case who were busy sending their troops over to our country to do their thing? So that was the basis for Wolves at the Gate.
Okay. As an author, like in the process of writing the book, what was some of the things that you had to work through as you're writing in real time? Is there any challenges that you faced during writing the book?
There were a couple major challenges. When I read alternative history, I like something that's fairly realistic. While something in history has changed, I want the rest of it to be believable. Not space aliens, not time travelers, none of the rest of that stuff. And the challenge of setting up rules at the gate was, well, it's not easy to invade the United States. We have these large oceans on both sides.
Right.
And during World War II, we had our friends, the British, who had a very large navy, and they were basically guarding our Atlantic flank. What made this possible is, let's say, Operation Sea Lion, which was the German plan for invading England, actually was carried out, and England was removed from the war. The United States at that time had an army the size of Belgium. We had not put any resources into our military since World War I. We had gone through a large depression where the military was barely getting any funding. So we were completely unprepared for that war. It took us a couple of years to really get ramped up. So what happens if England is removed from the equation and all of a sudden we're facing Germany, Italy, and Japan with our World War I era Navy and our World War I era Army? So that was the predicate. I had to come up with a logical reason, a plausible, something plausible for to set this up to actually allow an invasion of the United States, because we can't comprehend something like that. It's never happened since the War of 1812.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been a war on our country short of the Indian War since the Civil War. So it's almost like incomprehensible to Americans. And I've had some discussion with some of my readers and that sort of thing. This kind of sort of thing can't happen. I said, read the book.
Yeah.
I set it all up for you.
So you're writing strategy as well, right? In the whole process of writing the book?
Somewhat. Basically, the way this is set up as far as the book goes, as far as the approach, is I wanted to do this primarily from the point of view of everyday men and women.
Okay.
The folks that are in the military on both sides. This isn't a one-sided book. We have German characters, we have Japanese characters, we have Italian characters. And basically what I wanted to do was do most of the book from their point of view, on the ground, what is happening to them. The other characters I have, famous historical characters, the Franklin Roosevelts, the Hitlers, the Rommels, the Pattons, that sort of thing. They're mostly there to give a little bit of context so you can see how the table is being set, and our heroes in the book and our villains in the book on the ground are being influenced by what those decisions are. So that was how the structure of the novel itself. So you have the famous historical characters, but all the people on the ground are basically fictional characters that I came up with in order to represent certain types of people that would be involved in a conflict like this.
Was there any thought in your mind as you're writing about keeping things accurate historically, or are you using them kind of like anchor points where you're free to write whatever you want, but you just have them as kind of things that kind of anchor us in the story to keep us kind of following the path?
Without giving up too much stuff about the story.
Okay. Yes, please, no.
There are probably about 4 or 5 major twists of history in the story in order to set up the scenario.
Okay.
Everything else is just the way alternative history works is you do those twists, then you try to stay accurate to the history that would have occurred if these twists had happened in actual history.
Okay, I get it.
So yes, I try to stay as accurate as possible. For instance, the equipment is accurate. I try to make the accents accurate for that time period. The backdrop and the towns and everything else, it's as accurate as I can get it. I did probably 2 years of research preparing for this book. For instance, there is a town outside of Charleston where the German invasion in this book occurs. And a lot of things happen in this little town of Somerville. And I was scouring the internet for things like pictures of what this little town looked like in the 1940s. So when I was talking about Main Street in this little town, I was talking about a certain store. Those things actually existed. Because something with the alternative history community is they all tend to be history buffs, and they're going to get on you if you start going off into space someplace with making up too much. For instance, like if you're familiar with Harry Turtledove and his books, I think he had time travelers from South Africa bringing AK-47s to the South in one of his novels. Well, it was a very entertaining novel. It wasn't particularly realistic. So I tried to stay as realistic to the history and the time period as I could with those 4 or 5 historical twists.
Okay. For you as an author, what's your proudest moment for this book? Like what makes you so happy to talk about it?
The people are enjoying it. I'm a debut novelist. This is the first time I have done a novel. And of course, I had to take one of the most difficult formats for a novel, which is one of these big, sprawling James Michener sort of multiple point of view on novels, because that's what I like to read. But it's not easy to read one of these things. So you get so immersed into it that you hope that you have a decent perspective about the book. Until I started getting feedback from people who had read it, I didn't quite believe it was good. It was my first effort. It can't be good. It's sort of like a rookie thing. But I've had a lot of feedback. It's just thrilled the heck out of me because I wasn't expecting that with a first novel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big task for anyone to do. And then, like you said, to do a book that complicated with that many moving pieces, that's a huge task. If you had known how much work it was going to be, would you have done that for your first one, do you think?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay,
good. The reason I'm doing this is because I enjoy it. I'm 63, and we had planned on basically looking at some sort of retirement around 65. And I would be bored out of my mind if all I was doing was sitting around watching TV and that sort of thing. So I was thinking about what do I want to do after I quote retire from practicing law, and writing is something I've always enjoyed. And fiction, which is something I have never done before, maybe 5 years ago, has been just an absolute thrill because you get to create your own worlds. Whereas nonfiction, you're basically reporting what actually happened in some event or another. But with fiction, you get to create your own people and everything else. And I've created some amazing characters in the book. And it's been just a joy writing them.
Is there any part of your legal background at all that you had to tap into as far as inspiration for the book?
No. It's two different things with this book because it involves a lot of everyday people. I had to do some research on how people were living back then, how people would talk, whether or not things like the rivalries between the North, our North and the South, that still existed in World War II. There wasn't as much travel as we have today. People weren't moving down, people from the North weren't moving down to the South and vice versa for the most part. So you were still in your own little town. A lot of times you grew up and died there. There wasn't as much mobility as there is today. So that was something I had to research because I've been an extremely mobile person myself. I've lived in about probably 15 different places in my life, and not counting all the military places the military sent me. So I had to develop that. The main characters in my book are Jim and Florie Fraser. And Jim is a Boston Yankee, Yankee not being the baseball, but a Boston Yankee with a little bit of the accent and that sort of thing. And his family did dredging work for Boston Harbor. And he ends up being sent down by the company down to Charleston, South Carolina, to help develop their harbor because they were doing that before World War II. So he gets sent down there and meets and falls in love with his local girl by the name of Florie Stockton. And they have two young twin daughters. And at the time this book is really occurring, both of the twin daughters were about 5 apiece. So now I've got this young family out here, and all of a sudden their world is about ready to change seriously.
Wow. Okay. So Bart, for a new reader coming to your book, first time reading your work, they're about to open the book and read it for the first time. Grab us by the hand, kind of give us your hopes for a reader as they get into the book. What kind of things did you have in mind on behalf of the reader you wanted them to know about this book?
Don't come in with any preconceptions. You don't need a degree in history to like this book. I'm actually getting some feedback from people that just like fiction in general. And because this tends to be a military-oriented book because we're dealing in a war. But I try to develop all the non-military characters. So it's easily accessible for the average person. What I tried to create was a book where you can immerse yourself and imagine you are in this situation, even if you're not military or anything like that. All of a sudden, your world is turned upside down because half of this point of view is from the ladies in the heroes' lives and their kids and what they're doing. So even if this isn't normally what you would consider your cup of tea, you shouldn't need any military background or a major historical background for this. Now, if you're a history buff like I am, and a number of people I know are, there's plenty of history in there for you. But I tried to make this accessible for the average reader.
Okay. So yeah, that's good to know because, again, some people might think, wow, I don't know a lot about military history, so I don't know if this is going to be the book for me. But the one thing I love about a podcast is hearing in the words of the author what the book is and what your intent is. Because now, as we listen to this, we're like, the book is for me now. Now I know this from you, but I also know who this book would be a great gift for. Just by listening to you talk about this, I'm like, oh, this is going to be great for my friend Stan. He's going to love this book, right? So you're just kind of thinking and listening, going, oh, this is really good. So, okay, this is not going to be just a one and done, though. You have plans to keep writing. Is that correct?
That's correct, especially with the feedback I've been getting. I was curious how the book would actually do because I had a number of ideas of things I wanted to write. With this particular idea, I was hoping for a 3 or 4 novel series. And what I'm hoping to do now that I'm retired from the practice of law and no longer doing this part-time and these things, is to be able to dedicate basically full-time to this. I hope to have the second novel out next fall and the third novel out the fall after that. So this will be the first in a series. And there are a number of cliffhangers at the end of this. You'll want to read the second book. Good. I've been getting a lot of feedback from people saying, I hope you're writing a second book for this. And I'm not going to be happy with this or not.
That's good feedback. I like that. So as you plan out these books, do you have a big picture then in your mind of where the next books are going in your mind, or are you just kind of approach them one at a time?
I'm too organized and anal for that.
Okay.
Basically, the way I write a book, for just folks that don't know this, is there's a couple of different approaches to writing novels. And one is Stephen King's approach, which is basically he does a stream of consciousness. He just makes sure he writes about 15 pages a day. And I don't know how anybody does that, but writes about 15 pages a day, then organizes it later. Whereas I'm just the other type of person. I have everything outlined ahead of time. That's when I do my writing. That's when I know I'm going to do what my story is going to be. Then when I get around to actually writing the dialogue and everything else, it's just a matter of filling in the blanks and presenting a story that I've already formulated in my mind. I am almost completed the full outline, which is itself is about 80 pages long, for the final novel. Like I said, I do detailed outlines.
Nice.
So the next novel is just about fully outlined that I'll start writing it probably in January.
Wow.
I already have what I want to happen in the next novel or two already formulated in my mind. I know where I want the characters to go. I know who's going to live. I know who's going to die. in what they're basically going to do. But I don't have a full-blown outline for the third and fourth novels.
Okay. All right. So, Bart, I have a lot of authors that listen to the show. They're new to writing. They're coming for inspiration. They're coming to hear a fellow author and kind of how they approach writing and maybe how they've changed as a human in the process of writing the book. Any words of wisdom for a new author listening to the show and encouragement for them to write their story?
To begin with, write it. A lot of times you get to a page, you want to be an author, and it sounds just so much fun, and you want to be the next Stephen King or anything like that. Forget about being someone else. Be yourself and write. Until you've actually done it, you don't know whether or not you can do it. Because a lot of folks, they decide they want to be an author or something like that, then look at that blank page and they can't come up with an idea. Just come up with some ideas in your head and just write them. And do whatever approach works for you. Again, I'm probably on the far end of this scheme with really anal authors that write these detailed outlines before they actually write the book. You may be a stream of consciousness person. That's not me, but it could be you. So don't try and imitate what I'm doing with outlines or something. Outlines can be useful for structuring your story, especially if you have a complex story like mine. I have a lot of moving parts in my novel. I have over a dozen point of view characters, not just 1, 2, 3, or 4. I've got over a dozen point of view characters that are important in this book. And what my greatest fear writing this book was to leave loose ends, plot lines that were just left hanging there that are going to drive the reader crazy and get them to throw out my book. So I wanted to make sure that all those plot lines were tied up and all the characters' interactions with one another make sense. That's why a detailed outline made sense for me. But maybe you're just writing something with a hero and a villain, and you've got an idea in your head, but you just want to write it out. Go write it out.
Yeah.
Whatever works for you.
Okay. That's good. That's good information. I love that because through this podcast, I really do want to encourage authors who have really no point of reference for their writing, and they look at somebody like you who's published, and you're working on the next project already, and they're like, "Oh, I wish I was where Bart was, but I feel like I'm just at the very beginning." So any kind of wisdom you have like that's really encouraging for them. So I'm glad you shared that.
Good. Just really the pearl of wisdom is start.
Yeah.
Because most people don't have, unless they're independently wealthy or something like that, they've got a day job, they've got families, they've got lives. And it's hard to start taking some of your free time and dedicating you to this. And unless you start, it's not going to happen. This is not going to happen. Life happens.
Yeah. When we got together and did our little pre-chat, you also told me a little bit more about your military service in that you were a paratrooper jumping out of planes, which makes me very warm and sweaty just thinking of this. And the way you described jumping out, I loved it. I'd love for you to explain it to the listener because a lot of us have never done that to the degree you've done it. But then you talked also about parachuting in at night, which again freaks me right out because there's nothing to see. So can you tell us a little bit about toes on the edge of the plane, ready to go? Like what's going on inside your mind in those early jumps where you're going for the first few times? What's your body telling you that you have to overcome with your mind?
Just to give folks a little bit of background, I am scared of heights. And the only way I made that work as a paratrooper is to rationalize things in my mind. For instance, if any of the you folks were in the Army or something like that, if you know about rappelling, which is essentially going down a rope down the side of a building, that scared the heck out of me because I could see 60 feet down and I can imagine myself bouncing off of that ground 60 feet down. So the parts where you're actually facing down, what they call Aussie style, and walking down the building facing the ground was scary as heck to me. Now, My mind, on the other hand, when I was jumping out of the plane for a first time, we were at about 2,000 feet. Everything looks like a picture down there. And you're covered with gear, 150 pounds worth of gear, and all you want to do is get out of the plane and get this stuff off of you. So you jump out of the plane, and by the time you're out of the plane, it's too late. You can't be afraid anymore. And you clear the plane, and all of a sudden, everything becomes quiet. All you hear is a breeze around you. And you're coming down to your parachute, and you got to make sure that you have the proper forms. You don't break a leg or something like that. And you land. Night jumps are a different creature altogether. You can't see the ground. All you see is a dark area outside that you're about ready to go out the side of the aircraft into. And you're usually at about 500 feet, which means that's enough time for your parachute to deploy, you to slow down, and you to land. Now, the reason why you're doing this insanity is because in real life, when they're dropping you on top of an enemy unit, you don't want them seeing you. You don't want them taking shots at you while you're hanging in the air, coming down in broad daylight. So most jumps actually occur at night, very low as we can get them. And that's what a night jump is. And of course, in my book, I had to include a paratrooper. He's a bad guy. He's a German, what they call Fallschirmjäger. But I had to include a paratrooper.
Of course. Yeah, like just the training alone to be able to do that. Like, I don't know. I'd be in those first early classes going, I don't know.
It's not that complicated. They teach you to come out of the side of the aircraft without doing something stupid that's going to get yourself tangled up. And basically that is you put your hands on both sides of your reserve chute in case you got to use the thing. And your reserve chute is attached to your front, and you just walk out the door. And you have a cord that's attached to your main parachute that's attached to a cable inside the aircraft, and it pulls your chute for you. You don't have to do a whole lot. Then once you have cleared the aircraft, your chute is deployed, I start looking around for other people in their parachutes because I don't want to run into them and get tangled with them.
Right.
And you can actually maneuver your parachute a little bit. And I get away from everyone else. Then I start looking at the ground and make sure that my feet are together so I don't. The way of breaking a leg is to start reaching down as if you're about ready to get off of something. And that would be the first thing that the ground will impact and break is you keep both of your boots together and you just roll on your butt and your back. Literally, that's it. It doesn't take much to learn how to parachute. Most people should be able to do it in about 2 days of instruction. They spend 3 weeks putting us through what is essentially a combination of instruction and a hazing effort.
And you survived. Well, that was good. Excellent. Because, yeah, like jumping out of a plane for the first time, writing, here's my segue, writing can be a very intimidating thing to jump out there and to start writing and get your story out. Like, who's ever going to read my book? Who's ever going to publish my book? Who's ever going to be there for me as I share my story? But it's nice when somebody goes before you who has done it and can come back and share their thoughts and their stories with you. It kind of gives people listening the bravery to step out of that plane and write that story, right?
I hope so. I've had a tremendous amount of fun doing that. If writing is your thing, at least give it a shot. If it doesn't end up being your thing, at least you tried.
Yeah.
But you don't want to have one of these things where you always wanted to do it, but you didn't do it because you were afraid. Go ahead and try it. Yeah. It's free. All you need is the computer.
So Bart, take us to your website. Where are we going to send our listeners so they can follow your journey and keep up to date on new releases, new projects you're working on, where you're most active on the internet? Where should we go?
Sure. My name is Bart Stark, Stark. And the website is bartstarkbooks.com. And as soon as you type in Bart Stark and books, there's not another website like it. It'll pop right up for you when you do the search. And that's my website, and it'll let you know about my book, Wolves at the Gate, with a little short bio and hopefully pretty soon some more reviews once I've gotten a few of them. And you can find out about the book. And if you want to read a little bit about the book, just go to the Amazon website. It gives you a free sample, and you can read the initial twist of history with Mr. Adolf Hitler that starts this entire novel on its journey. And if that's the sort of book that you like, by all means, buy it. I could use all the folks I can get.
Yeah, and leave a great review as well when you purchase your copy so more people know about Bart's book. Bart, tell us about the cover of the book before we go. It's a beautiful cover. There's a lot of stuff going on there when you open it all up. Can you tell us what happened? How did this cover come to be?
My publisher is a group called Warpath Press. They're brand spanking new. I think I'm their third author. And they were going to help me do the cover and all the things that I really don't have the technical ability to do. So essentially what they did initially with me, and I'm not sure this is the case with other publishers, many times they'll probably go off and do whatever they want to do with a book. But I've been fortunate with this publisher is they wanted my ideas all the way through. And essentially what they did for me is they hooked me up with a painter of all things, not a commercial artist, a painter. And I sent them my general ideas for what I thought the book cover ought to be like, along with some examples of other people's book covers that I enjoyed. And they sent me back probably about 10 different sketches of different ways this book cover can go. And I said, this is just too cool. And they agreed with me as to the sketch that I thought would be best. And then they painted it up, and we actually did some discussion on things like, well, what does an A&P store look like? Because that's the backdrop of the book in this thing. What did an A&P store look like in 1942 in South Carolina? And we actually got pictures of this. So nice. The artist could do the right color scheme. So nice. It ended up being a very cool color with the American soldiers and some SS soldiers dressed up the way they were back then, with a shot-up A&P store in the backdrop. And various review organizations actually have some feedback that they give you as to what attracts people to your book. And that cover was like 70% of the people who wanted to write a review for the book were first hooked by the cover, which is great. So hopefully if some of this stuff is selling in an actual brick-and-mortar store, that someone will look at the cover and actually take a look at the book.
Right. So yeah, as you're listening to this, make sure you go and check out the book on Bart's website. It's gorgeous. Like, it's amazing. That's why I wanted to know, like, this was done with somebody had some talent to come up with that book cover.
Yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised. I was not expecting a painter to be doing this, because normally it's a commercial artist. They'll throw in the usual photographs and that sort of stuff. Sometimes they'll come up with an AI sort of thing. And that's what I was expecting to get a feedback on, but I got a full-blown painting for this book. So yeah, even if you're not interested in the this type of book itself, go check out the cover. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. Awesome. Bart, yeah, such a gorgeous book. I love it. So thank you, Bart, for doing this. Thank you for being part of the show. And again, I'd love to invite you back as new projects come out in the future. I know that my audience loves to hear back from the authors that they fall in love with. So I know we're going to reach people with our conversation today, and I just want to keep that door open to you to try to float into our world again by parachute anytime you want and talk about the next book as those are come out. I'd love to have you back.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Just one additional thing for the folks out there. If you are a constant, what Stephen King likes to call a constant reader, you're probably a member of what's called Goodreads. And Goodreads has the book on there, and you'll have a lot more information and some reviews over there to take a look at.
Excellent.
It's a pleasure being with you.
Yeah, we'll put that link for Goodreads into the notes as well, so people can go directly there. But Bart, thank you so much for doing this. I love having you here.
Appreciate it. You guys getting snow up there in Canada?
Not yet, thankfully. No, we're happy with just fall right now still. Leaves falling. That's about it. I'm good right now. The longer we can hold off from the snow, the better.
Okay.
Awesome, Bart. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this, Bart.
Thanks. Bye now.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun, well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.